It was a warm summer weekend, perfect for a hiking trip. My friends and I had planned this outing for weeks. We were excited to explore a remote forest known for its breathtaking scenery and challenging trails. The forest, however, also had a darker reputation. Local legends spoke of strange disappearances and eerie occurrences, but we brushed those off as mere campfire tales. We set off early in the morning, our backpacks loaded with supplies. The trailhead was at the edge of a dense forest, and as we entered, the tall trees quickly enveloped us in their cool shade. The path was narrow and winding, surrounded by thick underbrush and towering pines. Birds chirped overhead, and the air was fresh and invigorating. As the day progressed, we ventured deeper into the forest. The trail became less distinct, and the trees seemed to grow closer together. We decided to take a break near a small, clear stream. As we rested, I noticed an odd silence had settled over the area. The birds had stopped singing, and the rustling of leaves was the only sound. "Do you guys feel that?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "Feel what?" one of my friends replied, looking around. "It's just quiet." "Too quiet," I said, trying to shake off the unease. We shrugged it off and continued our hike. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The light dimmed, and an eerie fog began to roll in, obscuring our path. We should have turned back then, but curiosity got the better of us. After a few more hours of hiking, we stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail that seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the forest. Against our better judgment, we decided to follow it. The path was narrow and treacherous, and the air grew colder with each step. As we walked, I started to hear whispers, faint and indistinct, like the murmurings of unseen voices. I glanced at my friends, but they seemed oblivious. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel a sense of dread building inside me. Suddenly, we came across a clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin at its center. The cabin looked like it hadn't been inhabited for decades, with its windows shattered and the door hanging off its hinges. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and the whispers had stopped, replaced by a deafening stillness. "We should check it out," one of my friends suggested, but I hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice trembling. "Come on, don't be a wuss," another friend teased, and they made their way towards the cabin. Reluctantly, I followed. As we stepped inside, the floorboards creaked under our weight. The interior was dark and musty, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. I shone my flashlight around, and that's when I saw it. A large, ancient-looking mirror propped up against the wall. There was something unsettling about the mirror. Its surface was covered in grime, but I could see my reflection staring back at me. My friends continued to explore the cabin, but I was drawn to the mirror. As I approached, the whispers returned, louder and more frantic. I wiped the grime off the mirror, and my blood ran cold. My reflection was no longer just me. It was me, but with hollow eyes and a twisted, malevolent grin. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys, we need to leave." "Now," I said, panic rising in my voice. But it was too late. The cabin door slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and I could feel a cold presence closing in around us. My friends tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. "Help us! Somebody! Help us!" one of them shouted, but their voice was drowned out by the cacophony of screams. In the dim light of my flashlight, I saw shadows moving, creeping towards us. They were twisted, distorted figures, their faces contorted in agony. I felt a cold hand grab my arm, and I screamed, trying to shake it off. "Please, let us go," I pleaded, but the shadows only grew more aggressive. Just when I thought we were done for, the door flew open, and a blinding light filled the room. The shadows retreated, and the screams faded into silence. We stumbled out of the cabin, gasping for breath. The fog had lifted, and the forest seemed almost normal again. We didn't waste any time. We ran back the way we came, not stopping until we were out of the forest and back at our cars. None of us spoke on the drive home, too shaken by what we had experienced. To this day, I still hear the whispers in my nightmares, and I can't shake the feeling that something followed us out of that forest. We never spoke of that day again, and I vowed never to return to the Forest of Shadows. Some places are meant to be left undisturbed, their dark secrets hidden from the world. I had always been an avid hiker, drawn to the peace and solitude of the great outdoors. So when the opportunity arose to explore a lesser-known trail deep in the mountains, I couldn't resist. I gathered my gear, invited a few friends, and set off for what we thought would be a memorable adventure. Little did we know, it would be unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. We started our hike early in the morning, the air crisp and fresh. The trail was challenging but beautiful, winding through dense forests and alongside babbling brooks. We were making good progress and enjoying the serene landscape, completely unaware of what lay ahead. By late afternoon, we had ventured deep into the mountains. The trail became narrower and more overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years. We came across an old wooden sign, barely legible, that pointed toward an abandoned mining town called Blackwood. Intrigued by the prospect of exploring the forgotten town, we decided to follow the sign. As we trekked further, the forest grew darker and more foreboding. The trees seemed to close in around us, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows. A thick fog began to roll in, shrouding the trail in an almost supernatural gloom. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, we pressed on, driven by curiosity. After an hour of trudging through the dense underbrush, we finally reached Blackwood. The town was a ghostly remnant of its former self, with dilapidated buildings and rusted mining equipment scattered about. The air was heavy with a sense of abandonment and decay. We wandered through the town, marveling at the eerie silence that enveloped the place. As we explored, we found an old saloon, its doors hanging askew. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dust and cobwebs. An old piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and broken. Suddenly, one of my friends, Sarah, called out from the back room. "Guys, come look at this," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. We gathered around her as she pointed to a large, faded map pinned to the wall. It detailed the layout of the mining town and the surrounding tunnels. One tunnel, in particular, caught our attention. It was marked with a red X and labeled Forbidden. Forbidden? Sounds like an adventure, my friend Mark said, grinning. I felt a pang of unease but shrugged it off. Why not? Let's check it out, I said, trying to match his enthusiasm. We followed the map to the entrance of the Forbidden Tunnel, which was hidden behind a crumbling building on the outskirts of the town. The entrance was partially collapsed, but we managed to squeeze through the narrow opening. The tunnel was dark and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. We switched on our flashlights and began our descent into the depths of the mountain. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us further into the unknown. The deeper we went, the colder and more oppressive the air became. Our footsteps echoed ominously in the narrow passage. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a large cavern. In the center of the cavern stood a massive, ancient-looking door, covered in strange symbols and runes. The door seemed out of place, as if it didn't belong in the natural world. "What do you think is behind it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Only one way to find out," Mark said, stepping forward. As he reached for the door, I felt a sudden surge of dread. "Wait, maybe we shouldn't," I started to say, but it was too late. Mark pushed the door open, and a rush of icy air poured out, extinguishing our flashlights. We stood in complete darkness, the only sound our ragged breathing. Then, from the depths of the cavern, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I fumbled to turn my flashlight back on, and when the beam finally pierced the darkness, I wished it hadn't. Standing before us was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with pale, almost translucent skin stretched tightly over its skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. It let out a blood-curdling screech and lunged at us. We scattered, running blindly through the darkness, the creature's growls echoing off the walls. I could hear my friends' panicked cries, but I couldn't see them. The tunnel seemed to twist and warp around me, and I struggled to find my way back to the entrance. As I ran, I stumbled over something and fell hard, my flashlight skittering away. I reached out, trying to find it, when I felt a cold, clammy hand grab my ankle. I kicked out, desperate to free myself, and scrambled to my feet. In the dim light, I saw the creature dragging one of my friends into the darkness. "Help! Somebody, help!" my friend screamed, but there was nothing I could do. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tunnel and into the open air. The fog had thickened, and the forest seemed even darker and more menacing. I turned back, hoping to see my friends following, but there was no sign of them. Desperate, I ran back to the mining town, but it was as empty and silent as before. I shouted their names, my voice echoing through the abandoned buildings, but there was no response. The only sound was the whispering wind and the distant growl of the creature. I spent the night in the saloon, unable to sleep, my mind racing with fear and guilt. When morning finally came, I made my way back to the trailhead, hoping to find help. I reported what had happened to the authorities, but they found no trace of my friends or the creature. To this day, I am haunted by the memory of that night. I often wonder what became of my friends and what exactly we unleashed in that forbidden tunnel. The experience left me with a deep-seated fear of the unknown, and I have never set foot in a forest since. Some places are better left unexplored, their dark secrets buried forever. There's something about the call of the wilderness that's hard to resist. That's what drew me and my friends, Tom and Emily, to plan a hiking trip deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. We were seasoned hikers, always on the lookout for new trails and breathtaking scenery. Little did we know, this trip would offer more than just scenic views. It would plunge us into a nightmare we could never have imagined. We started our hike early, the sun just beginning to rise over the peaks. The forest was beautiful, bathed in the soft morning light. As we hiked, the path took us deeper into the woods, the trees growing denser and the underbrush thicker. By midday, we had reached a part of the forest that seemed almost untouched by human hands. "Check out this trail," Tom said, pointing to a narrow, barely visible path leading off the main trail. "I bet it leads to something cool." Emily and I exchanged glances, our curiosity piqued. We decided to follow the trail, venturing deeper into the unknown. The further we went, the more the forest changed. The air grew cooler, and an eerie silence fell over the woods. It felt as though we had stepped into another world. After a few hours, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It looked ancient, with its wooden walls rotting and the roof caving in. The place had an aura of decay and neglect, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. "This is creepy," Emily said, shivering. "Let's just take a quick look and then head back." We approached the cabin cautiously, pushing the creaking door open. Inside it was dark and musty, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. There was something unsettling about the place, but we couldn't put our finger on it. "Look at this," Tom called from the corner of the room. He was pointing to an old, weathered journal lying on a table. He picked it up and started flipping through the pages. "It's a journal," he said. "Looks like it belonged to a trapper or hunter." He wrote about strange things happening in the forest, disappearances, strange creatures. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Maybe we should leave," I suggested, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. Just as we were about to go, we heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from outside. We froze, exchanging terrified glances. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and we knew we had to leave immediately. We bolted out of the cabin only to find ourselves face to face with a creature that defied all logic. It was huge, standing at least 7 feet tall, with matted fur and glowing red eyes. Its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth, and it emitted a stench of decay and death. "Run!" Tom shouted, and we took off, sprinting back down the trail. The creature let out a deafening roar and gave chase, its heavy footsteps pounding behind us. My heart was racing, and all I could think about was getting away. We ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at our faces and underbrush snagging at our clothes. The creature was relentless, its roars echoing through the trees. In our panic, we got separated. I could hear Emily screaming somewhere to my left, but I couldn't see her. Desperate, I stumbled upon a small cave and ducked inside, hoping to hide from the beast. I crouched in the darkness, my breath ragged and my heart pounding in my ears. The sounds of the creature's pursuit grew fainter, and I prayed it had lost my trail. After what felt like an eternity, the forest grew silent once more. I waited, too afraid to move, until the sky outside began to darken. Summoning my courage, I crept out of the cave and started searching for my friends. I called out their names, my voice hoarse and shaky. There was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. As night fell, I knew I had to find them or risk getting lost in the darkness. I made my way back to the cabin, hoping they had returned there. When I reached the cabin, I found Tom sitting on the steps, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He looked up as I approached, relief washing over his features. "Where's Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost her in the woods." We decided to stay at the cabin for the night, hoping Emily would find her way back. We barricaded the door and huddled together, too terrified to sleep. Throughout the night, we heard strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and the occasional growl of the creature. As dawn broke, we ventured out once more to search for Emily. We scoured the forest, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The forest seemed to have swallowed her whole. Desperate and defeated, we made our way back to civilization and reported her disappearance to the authorities. A search party was organized, but they found nothing. Emily had vanished without a trace. To this day, the memory of that hike haunts me. I can still hear the creature's roars and see its glowing eyes in my nightmares. The forest took Emily from us, and I'll never forgive myself for not being able to save her. Some places are meant to remain untouched, their dark secrets hidden from the world. And some horrors are better left undiscovered. It had been years since I had set foot in the old quarry. Nestled deep in the heart of the mountains, it was a place we used to explore as kids, drawn by its rugged beauty and the promise of adventure. As we grew older, our visits became less frequent, and the quarry fell into the realm of distant memories. But with the lockdown in full swing, a sense of nostalgia gripped us, and my friends and I decided to revisit our childhood haunt. We set out early in the morning, the sun casting long shadows across the deserted streets. The town was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling life we were used to. As we left the town behind, the familiar landscape of the quarry came into view. The path was overgrown, and the trees seemed to lean in, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The quarry itself was a massive, gaping wound in the earth, surrounded by jagged cliffs and dense forest. A small, placid lake had formed at the bottom, its surface reflecting the sky above. We spent the day exploring, reminiscing about old times, and enjoying the rare opportunity to be outside. As the afternoon wore on, we decided to venture deeper into the quarry, to a part we had never explored before. The path led us to an old, abandoned mine shaft, its entrance partially collapsed and overgrown with ivy. Despite the warnings etched into the rusted sign, "Keep out," we couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. We gathered our flashlights and cautiously made our way inside. The air was damp and musty, filled with the scent of earth and decay. The tunnel was narrow and dark, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As we moved further in, the light from the entrance faded, and an unsettling silence enveloped us. "Do you guys hear that?" Sarah, one of my friends, whispered, her voice trembling. We stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing, just the oppressive silence. Then, faintly, we heard it. A distant, rhythmic tapping, like someone hammering away deep within the mine. It sent chills down my spine. "It's probably just the wind," Tom said, trying to sound confident. But I could see the fear in his eyes. We continued, our nerves on edge. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It felt as though we were being drawn toward something, compelled by an unseen force. The tunnel opened up into a large cavern, and we froze in our tracks. In the center of the cavern stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It held a pickaxe, the source of the rhythmic tapping. As we watched, it turned toward us, its hollow eyes piercing through the darkness. "Run!" I shouted, but my voice seemed to fall flat in the oppressive air. We turned and bolted back down the tunnel, the figure's footsteps echoing behind us. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around us. The light from our flashlights flickered and dimmed, and panic set in. "Don't look back," Tom shouted, but it was too late. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the figure gaining on us, its eyes burning with malevolence. We reached the entrance and burst out into the open air, gasping for breath. The figure stopped at the mouth of the tunnel, its eyes fixed on us. Then, slowly, it retreated into the darkness, the rhythmic tapping fading into silence. We didn't stop running until we were well away from the quarry. The town was still eerily quiet, the lockdown amplifying the sense of isolation and fear. We made our way back to our homes, our minds racing with the events of the day. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure, its hollow eyes staring into my soul. The rhythmic tapping echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of the terror we had encountered. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew the truth. The quarry had always been a place of mystery and danger, but now it was something more, haunted by a malevolent spirit, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. We had disturbed its rest, and it had let us go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting, watching. In the weeks that followed, the lockdown continued, and the town remained shrouded in an eerie silence. I often found myself staring out the window, my mind drifting back to the quarry. The rhythmic tapping haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that lay hidden in the depths of the earth. We never spoke of that day again, each of us carrying the burden of our encounter in silence. The quarry became a forbidden topic, a place we vowed never to return to. Some secrets are better left buried, their dark truths hidden from the world. And some places, no matter how alluring, are best left unexplored.